I'm deciding to do another screencasted presentation. I really like this format, so I'm gonna just go by discussion question like I did last week, slide by slide, and I've got some visuals for you as well. So let's get going. All right, the first question was to analyze and describe the concept of media literacy and then construct an argument for its integration into contemporary curriculum. So let's start with what media literacy is. Media literacy is definitely something that isn't new. In fact, media literacy education began in the 1980s when the internet was still this super new, small, interesting thing. So these concepts, even though our internet has completely, the way we've used it is completely evolved, a lot of these concepts are still very relevant. Media literacy is reading the media from a critical point of view and understanding that we're living in relationship with the media. Essentially, it's about reading into the media the exact same way that you would read into a book. The same way that we analyze what is the author's purpose, what are some of the themes, what's some symbolism, is the same way that we should be reading media. We should be reading it from a critical lens instead of just accepting everything that we read to be literal truth. In her TED Talk, Andrea Kahita put it as media literacy is looking for the untold story, so sort of reading between the lines and deconstructing media. And it's definitely about taking more of an active and critical role in your intake of media and in your creation of media, both sides of that. So why do we need it in curriculum today? So even though little has changed in regard to what media literacy is and what it's for, there's a huge shift, I think even recently, in the need for media literacy in schools. In one of the Edutopia articles that we were assigned, Stacy Goodman states, the situation is no longer us, the passive media consumers, versus them, the corporate government media powers. When it comes to perpetuating harmful media messages, the enemy is often us. And I think that this quote highlights the biggest issue that we have in media today, which is the fact that we are some of the largest players in social media. It's no longer just big corporations that are deciding everything we see. We are very much producing content that influences others just as much as advertising would. So I think that this quote is really important. This fact only becomes more blatant and glaring that we need to teach media literacy in schools once we acknowledge that kids are spending anywhere between 7.5 to 11 hours a day using and consuming media. We recognize that curriculum needs to meet real-world needs of students, but we haven't really adjusted that in incorporating true media literacy. It's more than just incorporating Facebook posts, Instagram posts, Twitter posts, TikToks into our classrooms. It's actually teaching students how to be critical consumers of media, critical producers of media. So media literacy is absolutely needed in curricula to provide students with the skills that they really will use every day. So that kind of segues into the next question, which is to actually create a lesson idea on how to integrate and apply media literacy within a specific and familiar piece of curriculum. And for me specifically, this is pretty easy to do because I teach ELA, so I'm an English teacher. And we already teach some skills that I think transfer quite nicely into media literacy. For example, some of these skills are identifying bias, looking into credibility, understanding author's purpose, thinking about audiences. And so I think that applying media literacy into a lesson plan could just be a simple change in what it is we're analyzing. So instead of it being a news article from 2012, it could be an actual social media timeline. So here's my playlist, and I chose playlists because I'm having students work independently this year, so this is one thing that I could take and use it directly into my classroom right now. So basically a playlist would be like a week's worth of lessons that students move through at their own pace. But I kind of outline each playlist so that it models a lesson plan idea. It just includes all 4 levels of depths of knowledge. So you would start with review and building the background knowledge on what is bias, credibility, and author's purpose, which is something that we've already gone over this year. And then we give them some practice on looking at this in social media. So one way that we could do this is to go through like have the students get out their phones and go through all of their own social media accounts for 10, 15 minutes. They can do one, they can do multiple, it doesn't matter. And then, they have to identify some trends or patterns that they notice. So looking at it more critically versus just, passively scrolling on their phones now, they're actually trying to look for some patterns that they're seeing on their own social media timelines. And then thinking, do I recognize bias? And then also, what conclusions can I draw about what I'm seeing in the real world versus what the world is saying online, and how does that feed into audience bias, credibility, persuasion, marketing, thinking about it more critically. And then the assessment for this would be to actually have students produce something. So maybe constructing an ad on any medium that they choose, like it could be a tweet, or they could produce like an Instagram ad that makes an argument for or against censorship and media control, and then providing a description of the strategies that they use. And so also like using some of those appeals and persuasive techniques and explaining them in their own post, and kind of seeing how they, as producers, would then create something being media literate. And then for our enrichment activity, which is always going to be a DOK4 activity, it would be to kind of combine these skills of being the consumer and the creator. So they would go and find an advertisement on social media, and they would break down the original by identifying the audience and the intended message. So really looking at it analytically, just like from the TED Talk with, Andrea Kahita. So I definitely kind of stole this from her here. But breaking down that original message and then using that breakdown to then create a new ad that would clearly state the quote-unquote untold story of the ad that was analyzed and critiqued. So kind of bringing the untold story to the surface. In doing these things, I would ask them, I think it'd be relevant because they'd be looking at their own social media accounts, and they would need to change their way of viewership. And it starts off kind of scaffolded, where they take it where it's relevant to them on their timeline, and then they become the creators, and then you synthesize the two. While this is just 1 week of media literacy integration, I think that many, if not all, of ELA standards could definitely benefit and be made better through the use of media literacy. And I think that because of this also can then transfer to many other subjects. I mean, even if we just think about Common Core, we recognize that reading is something that is valuable in all disciplines. Obviously, reading online is something that we have to recognize is valuable for all disciplines now as well. And I think that if we do this, we better prepare students for the world that they are going to truly inherit. Okay, moving forward to question 3. Describe ways that e-portfolios might be used to transform the culture of a school. So definitely switching gears here. So school culture and e-portfolios, I think, really kind of depends on proper implementation. If you implement it properly, you could have monumental changes in school culture. But if it doesn't happen as properly, then the extent of the change would be much less, if not actually bad change and more detrimental. So I have an example from my personal experience when I was an undergraduate. We had to use this program called Folio Tech, and it was part of my graduation requirements to create an e-portfolio. This portfolio was not highly emphasized, and it was not utilized throughout my time at the college. In fact, it was something I really had to scramble and throw together at the end because I wasn't very aware of it. And since creating it to graduate as a requirement for my graduation, I have not looked at it once since. In her Edutopia article, Vicki Davis states, if they're handled poorly, these portfolios, students and teachers may feel that portfolios are a waste of time, and this was exactly my experience with them. Because it was so, it wasn't incorporated into the learning process, I really saw no value in it at all. In fact, it was really more of a chore. E-portfolios do house the potential, though, to create great changes in school cultures by making portfolios that are both a showcase of student learning and also part of the learning process. They can empower metacognition by students choosing work that best reflects the standards And so then it actually aligns the outcomes with the standards, and students take part in that assessment by deciding, okay, what of my work actually does connect to this standard, which I think is super interesting and super productive. Additionally, effective use of ePortfolios could include presentation of work for an audience, which is shown to increase student engagement. And it also serve as a source of pride and ownership over their learning. And then the last point I wanted to make is incorporating student choice and relevant technology, students walk away with a true portfolio in which it could transfer to moving forward into college or moving forward into the career. School culture would then change because it would be an environment where students are engaged in the direction of their learning, they're engaged in the ways that they are assessed, and they want their learning. They know what they want their learning to say about them when they leave, which is what education is about, but I don't think that's as visible, and I think that these ePortfolios could be a really good way of bringing that forward into the students' minds. But of course, just as with global perspectives in our previous module, teachers have to have experience with and believe in the process for success to be possible. And I think that this is an interesting point, and I think that there could even be something to say about teachers having a portfolio of success for themselves in which they submit to their districts to really gain experience. And I think that could actually maybe ePortfolios and curriculum mapping could tie in quite well. So on that note, I'm going to move forward here to question 4, which is, well, I've broken it into 3 parts here. So part 1 of question 4 is to describe the process of curriculum mapping and research and describe how it's done. So curriculum mapping, just to give you guys a little history, is a tool that involves educators in the continuous improvement cycle that looks at both standards and lessons and how they relate to each other. It began in the late 1970s and early 1980s and was founded by Fenwick English. Since then, technology has really revolutionized the process of curriculum mapping because you can use tons and tons of different programs to help you link daily lessons and assessments and activities to content area standards, and then you can kind of see things that you've hit, things that you haven't hit yet, and how effective you were in actually addressing those standards. Curriculum mapping is defined as a process for collecting and recording curriculum-related data that identifies core skills and content taught, processes that were employed, and assessments used. And I think they put it more simply at the end of this article here from Education World. It's a record of implemented instruction, what's been taught, also how successfully it was taught during the current school year. And they use that as a reflection piece then to look forward into the next school year. And so this process I took directly from Education World because I didn't know about it at all before, but essentially it begins with data collection and review. It then goes into small group analysis, which transfers into large group analysis, just looking for those pieces, what that could be done better, areas that were missed, and areas that need to be rethought completely. Then it's given a timeline to which all of these issues will be resolved, and basically the pacing guide for the following year will be constructed as the resolution. And then they also make plans for when the next cycle will begin. I am running out of time on this video, so I'm going to talk about this last bit, which is about curriculum in my district, curriculum mapping in Hutch schools.